right, welcome everybody. I'm so excited that we have folks here on the very last day of the term. So hooray for making it through and just having to grade, right?
From the elevator.
Yeah, so there might be more. I'm Janet Vogel. I'm the director of the library, and I'm really excited to have Dr. Jill Line and Barb Anthony here to talk about an amazing community-based learning partnership that well, I don't know who started it actually.
We just had that conversation. Well, you can probably remember our origin story before we show up. We'll talk about it.
Yeah, but either way, this amazing community partnership between Joe's sport management students and Barb and Elise at PlayGap. And so I'm excited to hear what you all have to say. So welcome, Barb and Joe. Thank you very much for coming today.
Yay. Where'd you?
Here, but
I'll just stand here.
all right. No meeting. Do you want to share a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Barb, and I'm one of the co-founders of PlayGap, and I'm a social worker as well. And yeah, I'm impressed that you all are here at 4:15 when you're done teaching, and thanks for coming and for being here. Yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you all and answer questions. So hopefully we can just keep it informal or, conversational as we go along. And we'll get into it.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that this can be conversational, and so the hope is that not only will we continue this, but that the spark similar types of work and other courses too. So we'll talk specifically about the projects that my students were involved in, but also kind of generally the process. So these are the things we'll talk about. To start off, some of you attended a presentation I did earlier this year, but what is community-based learning? Use that term very intentionally. Why is community-based learning helpful in sport management courses, but generally as well. I'll talk about preparing students for engaging community-based learning, share a little bit about PlayGap specifically, and how this is relevant to PlayGap. And we really want to spend more of our time on the building relationship and how we develop a mutually beneficial partnership, which is key to all of this work. A little bit about the outcomes and what we've learned from the process, because it very much has been a learning process. So I have a definition of community-based learning here. I share this really mainly with the goal of distinguishing this from what we often call service learning. I think the field is going towards calling it engaged scholarship as well. So my terminology may change, but for community-based learning, students engage in an activity addressing mutually defined community needs as a collaboration between community partners, faculty, and students as a vehicle for achieving academic goals and course objectives. That could be expanded, focusing on mutually beneficial goals of also the community partner as well. So I added the intentional power sharing. The service learning, there's kind of an implied power dynamic of we are the privileged people serving the community partner in need. So I would really avoid the term service. It's very well intentioned. A lot of our students are really familiar with that. We talk about volunteering, which is highly encouraged, particularly through middle school and high school. So the community-based learning, we really talk about this as a partnership and how is this mutually beneficial? How are we thinking about not only our goals as learners in the academic sense, and like developing professional skills, but also how is this benefiting the community organization we're working with, and not just serving their needs, but then also I'll talk about asset mapping a bit, but thinking about what are they offering us as well as what we're offering them. So it's not just us, again, bringing our knowledge and skills to. So for me, I had community learning in my sport management skills, which is an online master's course fall semester. In that class, my students worked with several organizations, so PlayGap was one of them. And then in spring, in my senior seminar course, we just worked with PlayGap. So I had the undergrad, seniors, and then graduate students. But for all of them, hands-on learning experience is valuable in the sport industry. Talk about, and particularly the first class that I was teaching, we're really focusing on sport management skills. So it didn't really make sense to just talk about the skills, but practice. Working in the sport industry, you're always required to work with teams. So anything that really requires people to intentionally work with others is valuable. It was really important to me in that class, though it wasn't necessarily a required objective. But of course, in general, was that Playground is a nonprofit organization for whom sport serves the purpose other than competition. Competition is a part of it, but that's not like the main purpose. And so in working with community partners, my hope is that I can stretch students' perspectives on the purpose of sport beyond what they're used to with regards to sports. And then also, I've been talking with the Center for Social Impact as well. Right, doing this kind of project provides students the opportunity to learn about other career pathways they wouldn't necessarily think of. A lot of our students want to be a coach or an athletic director, and those are great career paths, but there's so many more things. And if we want them to find something that really aligns with their sense of purpose, I think there's a lot of potential in introducing them to opportunities with nonprofits. And also focused on nonprofits in the greater community area. So thinking about our relationship with the greater community. So there's a lot of kind of process aspects of teaching in this way, and so that involves the relationship building with the community partner, but also preparing students for this type of project. In both classes, the students weren't signing up for the class because of this type of project. It was something that was going to be a part of it. So I had to prepare them for what that was going to involve. And then also helping them understand the concept of community-based learning and not just doing a service project or just a project. And so this is a really helpful textbook for that. In both classes, we worked through the first 3 chapters. So stepped away from course content in terms of textbook learning there was, and really focused on just what is community-based learning. This book, that's where the definition came from. So they talk about service learning as well, but helping students understand this idea of a mutually beneficial partnership. We also really talked about the organization that we were partnering with. Both classes, somebody from the organization came in and talked to the students about the organization as well. And in the class, students also did research on a social issue that the community organization addresses. So it was important that we didn't just jump into the project, but the students really understood the value of the project, both for our class as well as for the community and sport in general. First semester, again, students were working with different community organizations. They were all addressing different social issues. So each group did some background research on that social issue. In this class, we were focused, we really started out focusing on gender equity, which is Playgap's focus as well. We expanded it to racial equity because that was easily integrated and also important, and also students really tied into that. So yeah, that evolved with student interest. But before getting into projects for both classes, students did do a short research paper to work on developing their understanding of those issues. One thing that is an activity in this book that I think is really important and I'm actually going to spend more time on in the future is asset mapping, which I think really helps us understand and explore this mutually beneficial partnership aspect, because students had to write down like their interests and their needs and strengths that they were bringing to the partnership. They had to do the same thing for the community organization, and they also did it for me, thinking like the professor's role in all of this. And then we talked about how each party was filling in gaps for the other parties, and then how that was going to then help us more holistically address the issue at hand. Also, this ties into working with a community partner. And so it started before the class began, but I created a memorandum of understanding outlining expectations And there were sections for like what was expected of me, what was expected of the community organization, and what was expected of the students. And so I shared that with the community organizations before the class began. But then I had students review an assignment as well. And so that was something I had checked in before the class about with the community partner, but then students were the last ones to sign in. So that we had all made that commitment. The book also contains a pre-service checklist of student responsibilities and also a checklist of student rights. The student responsibilities just as kind of reiteration of what's expected of you. I wasn't at all concerned, as hopefully you wouldn't be going into this kind of thing, about the community partners respecting student rights, but I also wanted students to recognize that like they are an equal partner in this, and so if they did feel like their rights were not being respected, then they have the power to say something, and that needed to be discussed. So, yeah.
Joe, I just want to, I actually use this exact workbook when I was a service learning coordinator, so I just in a second, I highly recommend it. It's really useful.
And we own it at the library at Evo.
Yeah, I don't, that didn't start with me either.
No, it's part of a package that we have that we get from our Opal consortium.
Yeah, so that was a really great surprise.
I'm surprised.
When I first started, yeah, so you can all access it, which is really nice for the students too.
Well, and Joe, I was even thinking as you were talking that even that initial process could be, especially for new or young or very like resource challenged nonprofits, like even more than ours, would maybe even benefit from that process, right? The asset mapping, the understanding of how they could not just work with you, but even future partners, right? So that could even be if that relationship starts out that way and it's not clearly defined, that could even be part of what you do with them, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Walking it even slower at the beginning.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We didn't have to do it that slow, but it could potentially be done that way.
Point.
Yeah.
Also brought to mind, one other thing that I think is valuable in the book was students are asked to really reflect on how their personal experiences shape their perspective on whether she we're addressing, and that brought about some really interesting insights from the students, and also connections with them in terms of their personal experiences that would come up in the rest otherwise. And so just recognizing that positionality before going into these projects.
So this is a very like general snapshot of who we are. There's a very long story of how we rebranded 3 times in like 6 years, and that we continue to do this as fully volunteer and thinking about our future. But essentially, we're a grassroots organization, and very similar to a lot of relationships that I tend to be building in this space. It's me cold calling or finding somebody and reaching out and saying, hey, what is this? And can we have a conversation? Which, you know, doesn't take much to build these community partnerships with people, especially if they're willing. And so my co-founder, Elise, and I, we started talking in 2018 about this shared experience of being an adult woman and in sports or in recreation or in activity, and just having a lot of challenges, like general challenges in life, and then having that doubled by access and availability of resources. And so being a social worker and being a systems person and thinking about gaps of community needs, I said, like, this can't be just I know it's not our own issue. There's probably a lot of women and experiencing this as well. So we decided to act upon this and start an organization. And then I would say like 3 months before COVID, we got tired, she and I, and said, like, we don't know what this is going to take shape as, and we're kind of getting burnt out, and we're not really sure. And then COVID happened, and the teams that we were working with at the time all lost one another. And that's when it became clear to us that they couldn't invest what they had. They were giving as much as they could to their teams already as leaders or coaches or athletes. And so that's when we decided we were going to take on the role and become a nonprofit and provide the service for them, and serve, like collaborate in a collaborative way, but serve them. So that's when we became a 501c3, and our name was the Northeast Ohio Women's Sports Alliance, or NOWSA, and rebranded again just last year as Play Gap, because this isn't just a Northeast Ohio problem. So we continue to evolve as we realize the need is there, and so the scalability is there. But we have a very low budget. I'm sure if you know, we don't have any salaried staff. So all of the money that we get, whether it's donations or small grants, goes right back into our programming, which means we don't have a lot of time. right? And so we all have jobs or families. We're doing this in our spare time as well. So with millions of ideas, you can't act on all of them. This project being one of the ones that has had to sit by the wayside just because it wasn't at the top of the priority list. So having this, I don't know, window of opportunity is also a really nice, I don't want to say coincidence because there's always something we could use help with, but it has to be meaningful. And so that's part of the process that Joe and I went through. Our board and volunteers are comprised of a variety of professionals in a variety of fields. So I just happen to be a social worker who kind of understands this landscape really well. It's just how I was trained. So hearing Joe talk sounds like maybe some folks in different professions don't talk like that or think like that in terms of engaging the community. But for a social worker, this is like, awesome. Like, we got this, right? Which is a benefit, but that's something that you as a professor, you're going to have to assess, right? Like how knowledgeable is that organization? So our mission, and then really we're confronting the challenges for adult women and to find safe and inclusive opportunities, whether that's to play or coach or spectate, be involved, not lose that sense of identity, find a community, and that's why we exist. So, like I said, very large overview, but if you have questions, I also brought some flyers if you want to grab one. So as I mentioned, having a partner to do work with, whether that's bringing on more volunteers, having an intern, building our board, all these things that we and I have done over time, just provides us more increased bandwidth to do what we want to do with the dedicated resources we have, which is why our board members all bring something very unique and special, but they also are providing just their expertise. It's not just about money, right? Because money's great, absolutely great. But if you don't have the partnerships and the people and the bandwidth to do these projects, to see projects through, then you kind of have one-off, like flash in the pan type stuff. And we want to build this well. We want a really solid structure. So we are intentional about who we partner with, and that includes our member teams as well. All of them are vetted and for inclusivity and safety, and their needs are assessed. Who are they? Who are they open to? We go through a process as well. So that goes for any partners we have, whether it's community-based partnership or corporate or a sponsor. It's just it has to be meaningful. It has to be authentic, and it can't just be for show. Something's got to exchange, right? And so the vested partnership is that, sports management at Hiram, their needs or desires or, desired outcomes are going to be different than mine, but we're both mutually agreeing on the effort and that there's value, and we appreciate not just the value we're receiving, but what we're offering as well. So that's the other thing we had to be thoughtful of. It's like, well, what can I bring as a sports social work professional? What can Elise bring, right? What can anyone else in our organization offer back so that your students, your department, your institution gets also what they need? Because this shouldn't be kind of that uneven or inequitable power differential. We really wanted to make sure that was clear and equitable from the beginning. So, yeah. Do you have anything to add to?
So touched a little bit on some of this, but I want to talk a little bit more about the process of how we got here, and then thinking through like how this would be mutually beneficial. So this really was by chance. I was searching for organizations that addressed a variety of social issues for my first class, and I think it was maybe through connections and websites with the Greater Cleveland Sports Commission that I came upon NASA at the time, thinking about both gender equity, but also thinking about age diversity in sport. We don't talk a lot about post-collegiate athletics. And so the focus on providing opportunities for adults to continue in sport, like sport involvement, was really important as well. And that was something that I think my students appreciated and worked on the project too. So I did just reach out. We were trying to remember exactly how this happened, and I did just send an email and said, "Hey,"
which I love. Obviously, I do that all the time.
And so we set up a Zoom call and just talked through possibly what this could look like. I talked about what the goals were for the class, it was pretty open-ended because of applied sport management skills. It really was about the skills the students were using. And offering a variety of organizations. So students could, in that class, they did note their preferences of what organization you want to work with. So there was some personal connection, hopefully, to the class. But then I was asking, so like, what could be helpful for your organization? I really had no agenda in terms of what it needed to look like. I wanted students to also have options in terms of types of projects. Some projects ended up being really focused on fundraising and like event planning. So this project was really unique, but yeah, Elise and Barb just suggested that this was something.
And like a
that was
laundry
needed.
list, I think, of we were like, here's like 18 things we need help with right now. No. But I remember now that you're replaying this a little bit, I'm remembering our initial conversation because it was kind of like a get to know you, right? There was no real like I didn't have an agenda going other than to meet another person in like a sports space, but also like a social justice space. Cause just seeing Joe's kind of email and how she presented things, I knew that this was not just about kind of that headline sports experience. And that I think is a differentiator when it comes to our work compared to maybe some other sports organizations in the area. So that was something that I wanted to be mindful of as well, that, for sports management students, often there's like those big ticket events that really are resume worthy and they get to say, hey, I went and worked at the women's Final Four and I went to work at, the NFL draft that was here a couple years ago or whatever. And so understanding that students are looking for some of that big ticket stuff, but at the same time, right? So we don't want them to be turned off by a small nonprofit that has these like abundant needs and projects that are undone. But we're like, how can we allow this to just take shape authentically? So I think that very first conversation was very much like, here's who we are, here's what we can provide. It might not be that big ticket thing, but here's what we do have access to, right? Our whole membership is just professional people who happen to play sports. Like the sports is the second thing that we talk about, right? We talk about them as people first and as, socially, mentally, and emotionally well people because they're doing these sports, right? It's not like the sport is the thing that everybody's focused on. It's like, oh, this is Sherry, who's a board member. She's an accounting professional and she is at a corporate level that maintains like a huge budget and she's in charge of that and she plays softball, right? Like we can introduce students to amazing people that they would meet in the community, but it's not like, oh, that's so-and-so from this large male sport organization. And now you get to go wipe chairs at the stadium as an internship. That's what happens. And so it's like, well, just be aware that that's possible and that's great. And I think that serves in a different way, but that's where we left it. It was like, well, here's what we need. Here's what you're looking for. And then Joe said, well, let me go talk to our students and we'll get back to you. So that we just left it as a very, okay, we're here, we're going to keep going. And it'd be great if we work together somehow, but we'd like that to mean something for you.
And our first class in the graduate program, I had a sense of who would be in the class, but I wasn't really sure. So in terms of interest and skills, like I didn't know who was coming into the classroom, if that quite makes sense. You sent me a document with a list of possible things.
Yeah, we had and they were different. I think we tried to give you a variety of different areas, not just like all events because we did have some marketing needs and we had some, branding needs, but we also had this archive idea. Yeah. So.
And I was excited about that because there was a clear goal, but it also had a lot of flexibility into what that would look like. And so it gave students some freedom as well. So that's how we ended up there. So just to tie this into kind of general thoughts too, a lot of this takes, I feel like a lot of the time is the investment in the front end, and it can be overwhelming. But I think like you mentioned the email, and I feel like outreach emails, the memorandum of understanding, like I had conversations with a few in the room, but like in terms of professors working together who want to do this type of project in a class, right, there are ways that we can have templates that we then use, and I think that would save us all a lot of time and stress. Like having to like do all this from scratch, there's a lot that goes into it. So I think that could be a way that we could have a shared resource. And like even a guide for how to approach these discussions and how something is done. Because then the other bullet point on here is like defining roles. So that did tie into the memorandum of understanding, but that's something I really appreciated about our partnership is that you all did really take on a mentorship role, and we're like there's a balance of like guidance and giving students freedom and understanding that role, and not all community partners really get that. Some were very hands-off, some mostly that.
I was gonna say, there's a too many hands-on or too much of that too. I think on the other side, you can have too much oversight or like too much micromanagement as well.
Yeah, and in the first class, I did require bi-weekly meetings with the community partner, which I think was really valuable. And so there were check-ins from everybody, but in terms of guidance with what the end product would be, that varied from different organizations. But I always heard at least, so that was really good. But just be really clear, like we talked about time commitment and what their capacity was. They mentioned the meetings. This looked really different in senior seminar because I only had 4 people and they were working on one project. So I have a lot more to say about the first class, but time commitment, we talked about like a mid-course evaluation of the students' work and also an end-of-course evaluation of students' work. And then we were just
Interest. I think we talked about interest. Like I know I had done some of the asset mapping and beforehand, which I think helped when we posed the question, you know, what parts do you want to do? What parts are you interested in doing? Because the last thing we want to do is assume that somebody's fine with the design when they have like no interest or expertise or anything in that area, or like the desire to like try it out. So we did spend a lot of time on the front end, but I absolutely would spend all the time there clarifying and really getting clear on like who's doing what and what's our timeline, what are our expectations of check-in, and also how do you get a hold of me or can we get a hold of you if something, you know, in the meantime. And I think those are really important to flush out at the beginning. I think I'd rather do that in advance and build a good foundation than have to go back, or somebody's acting on assumption and now we have lost time, or the efficiency of the project has then slowed for whatever reason. And then, you know, and then from a student's perspective, I can see that that would be a real challenge of like buy-in of like, oh, now I've like slowed everybody down, or which is a good skill to kind of work through anyway, but like we don't want to be that person that like dropped the ball somewhere along the way and then caused issue on the student's end, you know? So we did spend quite a bit of time, I think, doing that, which paid off.
I mentioned a bit about like considering student skill sets and interests, so that this is what I was just talking about in terms of like talking with students once the class did start in terms of their vision for the project as well, what that could look like, how they would contribute in their groups. They had to figure out what their goals and contributions would be, and I was clear that might look different for different people, but they just have to have some agreement on how they would go about that. And that group in particular really did take on strengths-based roles, I would say. And then in terms of one semester at a time, so this is the one organization that we did work with both semesters, and I think there could have been potential for that with some of the other projects as well. But with this, like the grad students were able to do some background research in terms of logistics of like the funding that would be needed to really do a whole archive. I think we had intended, or I had at least envisioned initially that they would create some of the initial items in the archive. They didn't do that, but they put a lot of background research work in, so that shifted. So I think like having an end goal, but also some flexibility within that is both really scary, but also really important in this type of project. But the opportunity there was that I knew I was going to incorporate community-based learning in senior seminar, but I didn't know what that was going to look like until I finished the first semester. And so what the grad students ended up doing is setting up the possibility for then the senior students to create the first item. Downstairs today. And so that was the focus in senior seminar, with each student having an item to work on. I learned a lot from that process, and like looking at the time.
Well, and that one for me is even was helpful because I have an idea and I tend to just be like, let's just go and let's do that. And so also when it comes, I remember coming to Joe's class and sitting there and I'm like listening to them like process and like she's journeying them through, which is why it's so great to work with Joe, because like watching her like journey them to the answer, and I'm just like, can I just tell them the answer and we can just like move on and like keep going, because I'm just such a like solution focused problem solver, and I know even as teachers you are too, like you just want to get them there, but actually the learning and the doing is the embodying of the learning. So as much as I know that, I was like, taking this a slow semester at a time has been really helpful for me as well and our organization. It helped us slow down, gain some additional perspectives. And that I would say sometimes is not seen at the beginning, but incredible value there.
So I'm gonna move to the
Sorry.
next slide. No, you're good. But like, there's kind of maybe the more obvious types of skills, but we had an event to launch the archive, so there was a whole planning part to the spring semester as well. I would maybe not try to do so much next time. The education about the topic, networking, right? The students are getting to work with professionals in the field who also then connect them to other professionals. It was a useful kind of project where they were just submitting it to me, like they could see the relevance. One of my students, like his family was so proud of his archive item. It was really wonderful to see. So it just had, yeah, so much more meaning than a lot of final projects in the past. And we also ended up bringing a number of people who wouldn't necessarily come to Hiram, who came for the event. Pretty thought too. But I think in terms of something important before we wrap up is just like there's so much learning that obviously doing this repeatedly will get a little bit easier. But I think a big thing, and Roxanne, I have this like project-based learning too, but like the amount of uncertainty when you're starting off on these projects and students are expected to co-create and they're not necessarily always used to that. And so there's a lot of discomfort and maybe some complaining up front, but then like I had students commenting on the uncertainty, like at the end of the semester saying like, it was really unclear, but now like it makes so much sense. So like just waiting out that process. And so like, I think I really struggled with the amount of taking the lead versus having students take the lead in the senior seminar class. But finding that balance of how much they should communicate with the community partner versus me. I was a lot more trusting of the grad students, but then also learned that like students haven't learned about how to set professional income. So like,
Right. Yeah.
can't make assumptions. And so there's, I don't know, just that process, I think is something I'm still figuring out. Then structure and flexibility for innovation. Figuring out the number of check-ins, both with me about progress as well as the community partners. I had students meet weekly in groups for the graduate class, and every other week with community partner, and they always sent me meeting minutes for each one. I realized too late down the line that really they should have been submitting more drafts of things. Like there's just a lot of revision that needs to happen, especially when it has this big public side to it. So that is something that I'm structuring more now. But what that means is having fewer overall assignments, but just having them submit many times. Like the number of drafts of archive captions which were 2 paragraphs long. I went through many drafts and there's room for improvement. So I think that part too of just like we're so used to trying to like getting all the content possible and just figuring out what really matters the most is also something that's still in the process of.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, really trying to engage the students without feeling or having them feel nervous to talk to us, right? I think that experience from your side is, I mean, I think that's just part of the experience of being a student. Up until now, you've kind of been guided and led and like shown the way, right? And then all of a sudden we kind of, well, maybe not all of a sudden, but we asked them to start speaking. We wanted to hear your voice and welcome your ideas. And I think sometimes that's not always the case and in traditional learning environments. And I know that this isn't necessarily like that in every class. You know, I think there are more collaborative methods being done, and especially at the higher education level, which is super, but you're still getting those traditional ed students coming through, right? And so we're seeing like a shift, but asking them to like, what do you think, right? It's like scary, right? That there's power, even though we talk about power and Joe does a great job of talking about power, there's still, it just exists, right? There is that, right? We have to acknowledge what is, and that there is a grade, right? That comes from this. So that changes how authentically you get to show up, which is the beauty of being in my position at a nonprofit that is fully volunteer. Cause like, I would be like this anyway, for the record, but you know, there's no one really to answer to outside of everybody we work with. And so authenticity is super important, and saying what you can and can't do has to be done, right? We have to be able to say, hey, send me as many drafts as you want on an informal basis, but I'm not going to read it every single day, right? So just working through that has been, I think, valuable, because that's real life, right? Like that's the real life stuff that they're not always going to have these like beautiful semestered block times to get stuff done with somebody guiding you. So I think it was helpful to have a little bit of both.
I will continue. And apply for management skills. I'll have a group that will work on that. Possibly other classes do that as well, if you're interested. And yeah, I think we all, yeah, just want
That
to.
would be cool if we could develop like a little, like a guide. I think that a checklist or some framework that is helpful, practical would be awesome. And you know, this is sports management, which I think people like, again, sports is like, oh, it's a sports organization. It's like, well, you all might have content. I don't know what you all teach, but there's so many of us. Like I showed you like the expertise that we have and just the interest that we have and like how this shows up the intersections of people's lives. You might have an idea, right? Whether it's a research idea, a social justice idea, like there's a way I think to pull in more collaborative community-based learning. It doesn't have to be that sports management, applied sports management and owns PlayGap and vice versa. Like there are organizations that have so many intersections. And so don't get stuck on like the major or the specific area that it says under a filter when you find them, because you just never know. I know I would love to explore other things to do outside of, you know, event-based or archive-based stuff. You never know. Question?
Thanks for completing the survey to help us. The printer arrived today, so we'll get it all arranged and the new space downstairs will be beautiful and we'll get to meet down there.
And I want to shout out to Janet real quick too, because she joined some of our planning meetings and initial conversations. It was very much like, hey, we don't really have expertise in archival library sciences. And, you know, Joe said, oh, well, do you mind if we invite Janet? I was like, yes. And not only did she assist us with really understanding this process, what this could look like in the future, like the bandwidth that the university would have to have if we did this on a large scale, but then also the day of, she literally just like a magician made things appear that we needed. And it was incredible. We were like, we need a table, and no 3 minutes, maybe top, there was like a table, just like, so honestly, you were an integral part to this whole process. And if you have any feedback too, I think it would be great to hear what you have to say, but I saw your hand up too.
Yeah, I was gonna ask for you, what was the most rewarding part of working with the students?
I love working with them. I love working with students. So I was telling Joe, I think it helps that I had an abundance of community-based learning experiences as a social work student, like undergrad and graduate. That's what we do, right? So this was very familiar. And so part of my joy, I think, was being able to give a little back, right, of a lot that I got from great mentors and good community partners and, you know, great kind of like veterans in the field that helped motivate or encourage. So my hope is that I could at least encourage them just to like stay at it, think differently, be open to meeting different people, right? Trust yourself a little bit more. And I don't know, sometimes there are a few that were really tough to like read, or they're really quiet, but yeah, I enjoyed, you know, helping them. I definitely am thrilled that we got this off the ground. Like it happened, it occurred, has been documented that we did it, right? And so that's a start. So now it's not just an idea. So I feel like there's both things hold true with equal weight for me, for sure. And meeting Joe and having this nice kind of new relationship with Hiram, I kind of sense you all like, I don't know, like there's like this rebloom happening with Hiram, and I don't know if that's just a feeling as a community member, but like a difference, like something is being like shaken and grown from here. That's cool, and I'm like all for it. So, yeah, good job.
Yeah, I think that from my experience working with the students and working with all of you, I was just so impressed by what our students could accomplish. And, you know, I started with the master's students and you know, they were like doing all of this research in between sessions, meeting with us. And I was like, how do you have time for this? But obviously, you know, it's their job to do that.
Right.
But yeah, I was really impressed by what they came up with and their ideas. And, you know, they figured out a way to get the online archive off the ground and, you know, template for that. And then the four senior students, I was like, oh boy, Joe, that's an ask to do this whole event, but they did such a good job. And I think, you know, Barb talked about how you shepherd them through the process, and I tried to do the same as well, just to try to, you know, not say exactly what I would do if I were doing the event, but help them think through, here are the things that you have to think about. And they really came through. And everything came out really well.
Yeah.
And I know as a control freak, I never would have been able to do that.
I was like, it's helpful to have a good model to do
Yeah.
that too, because I mean, I'm definitely, I mean, as a founder too, I have to be aware of my own kind of limitations, right? So I'm a founder and I have all these other great skills, but all of this is kind of on me, right? Me and Elise have to shoulder a lot of this. And so part of our job is to like continue to hold that container and guide our organization. So there is a sense of like control that we do have to, I don't want to say relinquish because it's not that. It's more of like a being aware of how much we typically control, and maybe we don't have to do all that because maybe beautiful stuff can come from handing some over. And so, you know, that's, I think at the end of the day, I think that's why community-based learning is so important, and like having real experiences with other real people. Because I mean, there's, yeah, you get stuff out of it that's like skill-based and tasks and whatever, but that's what you go along and bring with you.
I was going to ask Joe as well. I kind of want to do something like this like next spring, but one issue I have, like, so you did it with like grad students and seniors. So the one issue I have, the class that I'm going to do is like, I don't know how many, so when I'm planning for it, like in the times I've taught before, I've had like 15 to 28 students, and it will be like mainly freshmen and sophomores. So let's say, would you have any reservations about doing it with non-seniors, non-grads, and also where you can't predict when you're planning it, the exact number of students? I mean, I'm still planning to do it, but would you advise anything different in terms of working with less experienced students and potentially having a much bigger class to do it with?
I mean, I would do it. I think I also didn't know how many students I was gonna have in the first class, and so I tried to be upfront with community partners and also gradually contacted community partners. Saying you're gonna have a group of about 4 people, but I'm figuring out how many people are gonna be in class. So like I think I had confirmed 3 and then reached out to a 4th, like more last minute once I knew how many students. So I had this list, but I was being intentional because of numbers. And so like, and groups could have been up to 5. So I think like just thinking through that process. And I had also told every community partner, I hope this is a long-term relationship and there will be other projects. So like for the rest of them that we worked with in the fall, when I found out I only had 4 in the spring, I said, we don't have the capacity, but like, we'll stay in touch and like, I'm gonna have another class in the fall. So I think I just tried to be transparent as I built relationships too, about where this could go. In terms of the students, I think there's like pros and cons to them being earlier in college because some of those expectations about like the power sharing part of it actually they could have less because like college is new anyway. So like, let's just try something completely different. So that could be interesting. I think maybe a little bit more of the preparatory work, like really those professional emails, like just like a little bit more guidance up front could be helpful. And then I think just with the goal setting, I tried to be really mindful of all the benefits of the process and not just the final product. So I'd say like be conservative with the outcome goals when it comes to like the concrete things that they're gonna have to show for it. And think about that with the grading structure too, in terms of how are you giving them credit for, because I had meetings with the groups rather than just giving them points for assignments. And so like having that more like personal evaluation about like what they've learned through the process, I think is what I would focus a lot more on. I also think there's benefit to doing this earlier on, just because, like we talked about earlier, our meeting, like if they form these relationships now and they get used to this early on, the potential for them to be engaged throughout their time in college, I think it's really valuable. For my seniors, like maybe there's an opportunity for them to continue to be involved, but like they're moving on to other things where if they did it as their first year here, like
Oh, yeah.
Can you just build on that though, because like logistically, our students are so, I mean, Haley and I have talked together and we couldn't get them all to kind of be able to go to one event.
Yeah.
And so I imagine you're gonna have to have different opportunities for different groups between their athletic requirements, other classes. It's just,
I was actually thinking about also your capacity. You know, you particularly with that many students you all have to be very clear and mindful of how much time you have. So if you broke up that class and did say like groups of 5 and they each had a community partner, that means you have now 5 different groups to help facilitate, which is how many extra hours. So like for every intern I get or every supervisee I have, I add a certain amount of time to my week, knowing that I'm not just getting something, like I'm going to have to put more time out, resources out, and you know this, and that's part of it, right? That's what you're committing to as being a professor, right? Like, but if you're doing a project embedded in your class that's already taking time, I would say scale it accordingly or think the scale through before you just say like, yeah, we'll do 5 community partners and split up the class because you're gonna be like really struggling with time. But if you did something very like topical and all of the groups did it, but it was like the one thing, right? You could check in about the one task or the one project, right? And you could make it very fun, like it's a social media thing. I don't know what you teach. What do you teach?
Social problems. So my idea was to do something on like rural poverty because I never really cover that. I'm more of like an urban sociologist, and a few students have mentioned that they're rural and we never really cover
Oh,
those kind of
interesting.
issues.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what about doing something on that? And there could be different elements. So one group might focus on how the media report on rural poverty. One could be like substance use and rural poverty.
Sure. Yeah.
So
Mental
it could be
health.
potentially with one partner, but
Right.
different types of projects that would help
Sure,
that
but it's like a similar structure,
Yeah.
right? So you don't have to check in about different structures. You
Yeah,
can just build
exactly.
one structure, different topic,
Yeah.
and have maybe one large meeting to just check in. So I think you just have to get creative with
Yeah.
yourself, but also just be honest with your time,
Yeah.
for sure.
I mean, I think there's a couple pieces to that too. In terms of time, something I supported faculty members who did community-based learning at the GA for several years, and something that we talked through a lot and that I've had to really think about is like content versus time focused on the project. And so like this isn't going to work in a class where you are teaching foundational content that is required to know for exams, you know, for certain competencies. So it isn't going to work for every class. That said, you think through like, yeah, depth of knowledge on a specific thing and getting to see it in the real world versus the need for knowing certain theories and concepts. So I think I spent a substantial amount of class time on process. Like when I had my synchronous meetings with the grad students, I was doing group check-ins, but we weren't doing lectures. And they had those meetings outside of the class. We in senior seminar, we also spent a substantial amount of time just like talking about the event, like working on the archive. So yeah, it's just a shift depending on the class and like what's possible. Also, I think like right, there is possibility for having the same product but with different content based on partners, or one project that like different groups work on based on like skill set and interests. So I think if there was a shared structure that all groups had based on the outcome, but then they have flexibility in that, that can create less chaos than what I had in my first class. So yeah, I think the like first one.
Yeah, and
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
And I would really emphasize not, like the grad students in particular, they wanted to succeed so badly, and they were like, they were like, well, we're not gonna create an entire archive by the end of this class. And I was like, no. And you know, like, that's okay, right? Like, so you have to set the foundation, and so like, it could, especially for undergrads, doing like just a small piece of it, but helping them see how that would lead to something else. Right, so like, the grad students created templates for, you know, how you would write a biography of a person, you know, a photograph of, or something like that. And I think the example of the senior students having to write their exhibit labels 50,000 times, I mean, that's real world, you do that in the real world. But for them, they're like, why is it in my paper, I'm done, right? And so just having them understand that 2 paragraphs might take them as long as 10 pages. And then it's okay.
That's actually what I was going to reference and what I was going to say, but you said it beautifully. So just I think that could be one of the parts of the practical guide, or like the generalized like knowledge that we can help share, is maybe thinking through what this might look like on a, you know, new to college or early freshman, sophomore, you know, community-based learning. What might you expect as a freshman to do community-based learning, right? What might you expect as a sophomore, junior, senior? Because then you can build, right? Then you get to senior and graduate work, and they already know. Right. And then so there's just like this really nice flow, but it's all different and it builds on other skills.
There's another model too, like I was at a college on the West Coast where like they spent the undergrads all of the fall preparing to conduct the study, doing the lit review, there wasn't so much project based, but then in the spring, they carried it out. So it makes me think like for freshmen and sophomore, they could identify funding sources, they could make it
Right.
such that those that wanted to go further as an independent study student, or center for social impact intern.
Yeah.
Could go to that step.
Yeah, that's cool.
I participated in a program for teaching social action, which is focused on community organizing. And the professor that leads that, he has it set up so students actually like carry out a campaign, which is wild. But what he's had a number of groups do is like for years, campaigns have been sustained by new student groups picking up where the groups left off. And so I think the more this can be incorporated into courses that you get to teach several times, which varies a lot for all of us, to be able to say like, the grad students were really personally invested in their projects. Like another group planned a fundraiser and like, we're not gonna get to actually like do this. Like we just have to hand the plan over. And there was a possibility that my senior seminar students would have maybe participated in that event had we worked with that community partner. So I think if there are ways that whether we carry it on in another parts of our own or with somebody else, like I think there's some interesting collaborations in terms of like handing it off to another class by a different professor. Like I think there are ways to kind of stage it that could be really interesting.
I love it. I love what you're teaching too. So what does everybody else teach? Can I hear like real quick? Can you just tell me what you all?
I'm a librarian, so.
Awesome.
I'm also a librarian.
I know. Who are you?
Education, teacher ed.
All like, element, like. it's all-
Mostly P5.
Okay.
History.
Oh, nice.
Technology.
Cool.
Elementary ed.
Nice.
Biomedical humanities. It doesn't sound as smart as it
It,
is.
no, don't say that second. Just let it land the way that you landed it.
Wow. like-
Yes, let people, wow, that's awesome.
I'm
That
like,
sounds
well,
cool.
you're ranting about social justice for 4 hours a week.
So we- Love it.
Love it.
And you had that.
Yeah, sociology.
Yeah, cool. Very cool. Yeah, I mean, that's awesome. We can work with all of you, to some extent. Or I know somebody that can work with you. So let me know if I can help.